You said something when we were chatting earlier that's really struck with me. Actually, you said a couple of things, and we'll come back to the second one. But the first one was that, as far as you're concerned, there's a world of difference between a dream and a calling. What did you mean by that?
It's interesting. That's kind of crystallized for me, over the last 10 years. And for me, it came from starting Higher Ground, which the organisation we run, and I was very young, early 20s, when I had that bit of a vision for that. And as I got into the field, because I had a career change, and it was a dream. It was a thing. It was the dream was something that I could think about and be aspirational.
Yeah.
And then I got to that place where I just didn't want to do it, but I felt compelled to do it. And so for me, that's when you identify that thing as a calling. See, a dream is aspirational. You can put it back on the shelf. It's one of those things that you can go, oh yeah, I'll dream the dream, and then go, oh, when it comes to the hard work, I put it back on the shelf and it doesn't matter and it has no effect.
Yeah.
Whereas a calling becomes a burden. It becomes this thing where you think, oh, I have to do that. I don't know why, but I must pursue that. So for me, that's that initial piece where that crystallized was with Higher Ground, because before I started Higher Ground, I was doing everything I could to get out of it, which is a bit bizarre. So that was what it was for me. And the way I kind of think about it in two other ways too is that dream is the potential. It's what you look at and go, I've got the potential, and you can see it on a good day. And calling is purpose, So calling is that thing that is purposeful, and purpose comes from your potential. Potential on its own is nothing. We've all got potential, but it's cultivated through a purpose. So that's that distinction for me has become, that's my guide now. So, and why I'm still doing what I'm doing.
So you use the word burden. That's quite a heavy word, right? That's it's not a positive word. So you think, when people say they have a calling, they have an epiphany, they have a strong desire to do something. I think it's quite unusual to have it described as a burden.
I think that's how it felt and feels to me. It feels if I don't do it, I'm out of kilter. I'm off track, and everything in my life is pointing me in that direction. And see, I learned when I was very, very young that life wasn't meant to be easy. So if you can move away from this place of thinking that an easy life is a right, prosperity is a right, then you can look at things a little bit more holistically and at a level where it's like, well, do you know what? Sometimes the things that are worth doing are just hard work, and they'll keep you awake at night, and they will turn you inside out. But, Western society is one that seeks pleasure and avoids pain. That's what we're conditioned to.
Yeah.
But that's not a rewarding life.
So look, we'll come on to the practical application of your calling later on in the conversation, because that's what we're here to talk about. But you and I have known each other now for, I think, 7 years. And it started off as a sort of professional interaction. We first met when we were talking about using your services. You're, I think, probably the biggest experiential learning provider in Asia Pacific. Certainly can't think of anybody that's doing any more than you. But as we've got to know each other and spent a lot of time together, actually, both here and down in Australia, I've come to realise that, like other successful people, the story of how you came to be what you are today is perhaps, just as interesting as all the stuff that you can tell us about, what you got up to in your day job. So, tell us about that, because it feels like, the experiences that you have gone through in your life have really shaped the way in which you interact with kids that come on your programs.
Yeah, look, it's been, without the cliche, a journey, and I look at it and everything's connected and leads to here, and I never planned to be anywhere. And that's just the plain truth. I never planned to be doing experiential learning. I never planned to be doing experiential learning in Asia. And definitely, if you saw my report card at school, it was no teacher ever would have said he will be doing the same thing for 30 years as a vocation.
Easily distracted?
Easily distracted,
yeah.
Easily
a lot of people can think about the report card and see those words.
So I think, for me, and a lot of it's come from adversity, from a childhood that was quite tumultuous, and ended up being just my mum when I was 14, had 3 dads come and go in that short time. And my mum, I remember, and this is really the clearest memory I have of setting a direction or feeling like going somewhere and being motivated was I raced BMX. So I used to hurt myself. I used to fall off a lot. The physiotherapist that I had only had 2 fingers on one hand. And so when at that young age, because I was, while he was working on me, I said, if he could be a physiotherapist, anyone can be, because he didn't have all these fingers. And so I said to my year 8 coordinator at the time, I said, it was a careers day. He said, Rod, what do you want to be? What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be a physiotherapist. That was my dream. I was going to do that. She was quite a practical lady, and whatever was going on for her was going on for her at that particular time. And she kind of chuckled and said, you'd never be able to achieve academically enough to do that. So I was in year 8. She said, maybe you could think, maybe if you work really hard, you could maybe be a nurse. So being a nurse in 1983 as a male back then wasn't a real kind of hero.
But unusual, would it?
It would have been a bit
unusual.
Yeah. There would have been some feedback from my mates if I said I was going to do that. And I had no desire to. If I wanted to do it, I would have done it. Anyway, I went back to my home that night. My mum was there, and I remember she's cooking dinner, and I was a bit upset. And she goes, what's wrong with you? And I said, Mrs. Such and Such said that, because we'd been talking about and we're going to career day, and she said, yeah, go for it. This teacher said that I won't be able to, achieve academically. And she turned around me, and I was just picturing in my head, she's got the wooden spoon in it, which she usually belted me with, but this time she was cooking with it, and she looked at me, she said, you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. And then went back to stirring the dinner. And that was it. That was, I say now, looking back, that was all I needed, and I still reflect back on that. So that then, in the sense of then going, anything's possible, the dreaming started, and then kind of bumbled on through school, class clown, had mates with everyone. But kind of when I was about 15, I went on a camp, and it was a church camp, and it was just a lot of fun. And there was kids so I thought I lived in a privileged home. I had no idea, and I still think I did, but there was other kids that were coming that were there, and then the camps and the activities were really helpful. And then I started thinking, I'd like to help some of those disadvantaged kids one day. And I didn't know what that looked like or what that would be. And anyway, things went on, and I became, I ended up deciding I would like to be a radio announcer. I thought I'd get in trouble for talking.
So before you go into that, I'm sure that lots of people who are listening to this will recognise that intervention from somebody at school who perhaps in your case, a pretty negative way. You cannot do that. And I wonder what you think about the impact on of that kind of intervention, because I had something similar. A teacher said to me, you'll never amount to anything, basically, because I was the class clown as well, and it had a really profound impact on me. And I was like, well, I'll prove you wrong. Yeah. And I suppose you have to be really careful, as an educator, that when you do intervene, either positively or negatively, that it does have the right impact on the kid.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think it's that thing where I would hope, and I've been working in schools a long time now. I think the consciousness of most educators now would have that understanding about the words that you say. I think that here's the one academic stick, and everyone must measure up to that, or you've got a disorder or something. I think that's going away a little bit, and we recognise the neurodiversity and all those other things, and not necessarily see them as a condition. I don't necessarily think they're a superpower. If ADD was around when I was a kid, I'd be doped up to the eyeballs, and I'm so glad it wasn't. My mum took me around. They just said I was hyperactive, and she said that'll do. Keep him off the red cordial. So I think it's that thing where I think that's changed, but there's still, and maybe I'm a little bit too kind these days, but I also see that there's some people, there's teachers that I've worked with over the years, all they want to do is be a teacher.
Yeah.
They don't want to be a social worker, you know. They just want to teach. And I get that. And that's okay as well. But I think the reality is, and, you know, even in my life and working in schools, the different generations of young people, and even now, young people that have been through COVID, you know, the impact, even when we started working together before COVID and then the young people coming after COVID, they're different.
Yeah.
You know, things are changing.
Yeah, there's no doubt that, and we will come on to that and how we deal with that and how you work with kids now that, I totally agree with you. Sort of post-COVID, there has been a significant change. But anyway, so you decided to prove your guidance counsellor wrong when she said that you couldn't be a physiotherapist by becoming a radio announcer.
Well, that's right. So she was somewhat right. Maybe what she should have said is that maybe you don't concentrate for long enough to get through the academics. Right now is not the time. So anyway, I went surfing more than doing exams during high school, and then one day I was listening to the radio and I thought, I don't know why. For me, it was probably one of those moments. I thought, gee, that would be a cool job, and I get in trouble for speaking in class all the time. So I went up to the local radio station, a small country town in Queensland, and said, what do I have to do to become a radio announcer? And the manager at the time, he said to me, looked me in the eye, and he was hardcore old school radio. He looked me in the eye, had a cigarette, is when you could still smoke in the office and not care about anyone else's health. And he looked me in the eye and he said, you need to be able to speak fluently and read well out loud. And I wasn't very good at either of those things. And I said to him, okay, I can't do either of those things very well. How do I do that? And he said, well, go and buy books on history, get the newspaper, and just read out loud every day and over enunciate your words. So I did that. And then, anyway, a few years later, I was talking to the guy, because for me then, I believe, and I didn't know this then, but my motto became, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so even back then, I'm a relationship person.
Yeah.
So it was then building relationships with people, and I got to know the local radio announcer. He was leaving, and then I got a call from that manager, and that was my start. And he said, I'll give you 1 week shot to come in. I had no experience. I'd done a little course. I went and did a little course, and he gave me a crack at it. And then, and my goal was to get to a station called Triple M. Triple M was like the mecca of the radio stations. And I went in there, so I got that job. And then I went down to Brisbane. I rang up Triple M, spoke to the manager, and I'd just gotten a job at this 4BU, this radio station. And I said to the manager, hey, I'd just like to come down and have a look because I'm going to work there one day. And he just laughed. I thought how many times he'd seen that. And he said, oh, yeah, if you turn up, just come in. And blah, blah. So I went down the radio station. They showed me around. And as I left, Jeff Truscott was the marketing guy who showed me around that day. And I got into the lift, and I still remember him looking at me and laughing. I said, thanks, Jeff. I'll see you in a couple of years when I come back to work here. Anyway, a couple of years later, I was working there, and Jeff wasn't there any longer, but I saw him at an event, you know, at one stage, and he didn't remember me from anything until I told the story.
Yeah,
but that was.
But you remembered him. That's
exactly.
That's the point. And I suppose you've got the colourful words of your mother ringing in your ear that you can do anything. And there's something there as well, I suppose, going back to what we were talking about before of, you know, there's an intervention from somebody.
Yeah.
You know, the chap that you met, and he told you, you know, if this is what you want to do, this is how you can do it.
Yep. 100%. And the thing was for me, when I was there for 6 months at that station, and when I resigned, I went and said to George, I got another, because the way you just get a better shift at another station at a bigger market. And he said, well, you lasted longer than I thought. And I went, oh, really? And he goes, yep. He says, you've got a lot of talent. He said, I thought if I had you for 3 months, I was going to be lucky, and I was there for 6. And so that for me, again, another little positive, which I hadn't had much of, you know, speaking into me and my talent that, again, obviously I'm telling the story now a long time ago, a long time later.
But I think it's round about now, if I remember your potted history, is that this is where your first real venture into, you know, outdoor and experiential education really starts to become a part of your life.
Yeah, that's right. I think I started to, well, part of the thing with radio too was to help young people, I thought I'll become famous and become a motivational speaker. And, you know, that didn't work out. But at that same time, I became a climbing instructor, or a climber and a climbing guide, just as a thing to do on the side. And, I started volunteering for some programs. And I started to see the impact that this was having on young people and on me. You know, climbing for me was the single most significant thing that helped me understand who I was. It was the first thing. And that helped me deal with stuff. I didn't realize I was an angry young man. And it's interesting when you're climbing, excuse me, you get into these situations. It's just very, like you fall, you're dead, you know, in the climbing I was doing anyway. And I was pushing hard again. I just wanted to climb harder and harder. And so that means it gets sketchier and sketchier. And I'll never forget one day I was sitting there and I was so scared if I fell, I was going to hit the ground. Now, probably a good chance I wouldn't have died. Guy I was with knew first aid, but I wouldn't have been in good shape. But I just remember this crystallization, because I've been working on these programs, and it was this thing where someone said to me, or the thought came to me, goes, how is this anger, and I was getting angry, and this fear helping you right now? And I don't know why, but it was one of those moments. I thought, okay, it's not. So it was like, okay, breathe, because getting angrier and more scared is you actually will end on the ground. Come back. This grade I could climb. It was within my skill level. It was just that it was scary. So anyway, that then after that particular climb, I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. And so I then did a course in experiential learning, a very short course, and decided from then, my wife and I, and whenever I say we, when I talk about what we do, I mean Sue and I went home and I said, this is what I want to do. I mean, I just want to help kids through this way, that the power of that, and then that's where we started. I then started getting more qualifications and working freelance in outdoor education.
And at that time, was experiential learning, outdoor education, I mean, that just wouldn't be something, it may well have been happening in different forms, but would it have been classified that way?
It was classified as outdoor education in Australia. And I always make this difference, I define things this way, in that I've never been excited or passionate about outdoor education. What I got excited about was experiential learning, because that was how it was introduced to me, not that it was outdoor education. The industry in Australia at the time was outdoor education. To have an outdoor education centre for big private schools was a competitive advantage. So these schools in Australia, so it's very institutionalised. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but there was not really many private organisations doing it.
And what's I mean, I'm fascinated by this, but what's the difference in your mind between that traditional outdoor education? You know, you're dragged off to some sort of place in the wilderness, and what you do, the experiential learning. What's the big difference here?
I think if you think experiential learning is the pedagogy, it's the style and the way that we teach. And that can be done here. We could play a game of cards. It could be experiential. You know, I'd do family therapy with kids, and we would play Toss the Pigs. And that how families played that game would tell me more about their interactions than anything else, you know. So outdoor education is but one slither of it. And if you think about the industry on a continuum, and at one end there's recreation, and then if you come along the continuum, then there's enrichment, personal development, then there's therapy, and then there's adventure therapy. The overarching term, I would say, is experiential learning, or even adventure-based learning. Some people would call it. But how far we go along here, it can be anywhere. Schools and what outdoor education's here around the education piece. Recreation could be, I'd take people guiding. I would always facilitate it a little bit, but basically you'd pay me some money, I'd take you guiding, it was a good day. You know, whereas a lot of stuff we do in schools now is more enrichment, personal development, would be how, or well-being is how we would probably talk about it these days. And then therapy there's adjunctive therapy and primary therapy. And so I worked in both of those areas first. And so that's the difference. It's not so much outdoor education is and still is in a lot of schools. It's naturally experiential, and it's contrast. So you need contrast, and the contrast for kids is it's so different to the classroom. And that's why there's, learning classroom without walls or school without walls. There's lots of different metaphors and language that people use.
And also, I suppose, but again, just thinking about, my own experience of this, outdoor education was, it wasn't just different from the classroom, it was different from your environment. So if you lived in a big city, then you were taken off to the countryside, and that might not have been something that you would ever have done before. So, to go kayaking, to do all these different things would be different. And there's a worth in that as well, right?
Yeah.
Just that difference for exposing kids to something new.
100%. And there's that thing where, Outward Bound's this organisation, Kurt Hahn started a long time ago, and it's still around, obviously here in Hong Kong and many places. And the really interesting thing is that Kurt Hahn and Outward Bound would have let me just push pause there. Experiential learning is experiential learning. We're there to learn. And we have this saying that says an unreflected experience is a lost experience. So it's when we reflect on things, it could be in the moment when I'm reflecting on whether I'm about to die or not, okay? And if we can process and reflect and then draw out what we need to do. So the how long an experience is, you can allow the experience to speak for itself a little bit. So and so it's not so much just how long, but the contrast between what the normal world is. So that's the thing. And then when it's shorter programs, it just requires more facilitation, more guided conversations and or techniques to help draw out the learning. So, and that's the contrast. That's the thing as a facilitator in experiential learning. That's what you're looking at all the time. If it's a long experience, then we can allow the program to have space and breathe and allow the young people to breathe. Sometimes I've run sessions for corporates over half a day and a day and a couple of days, and that's intense.
Yeah.
That's the client, and we just got to help them. We tell and ask questions. Mostly in a longer program, it's more about asking questions.
So longer program, that brings us, I suppose, to why you and I met. We, back in 2017, 18, I think it was certainly before COVID, we were looking for something different for our students. We knew that there was something more we could be doing, more, and we were drawn to this notion of experiential learning. And we've settled on something called Limitless, which is a 6-week program down at your place in Australia. And even now, even though we've run, I think we're on our 4th cohort. COVID managed to disrupt that. When you describe it to people, they're shocked. They're shocked that we could consider, and we're a high performing education system, that we would consider, taking kids in term time out for 6 weeks and giving them to you down in your place. I mean, what to your mind is the benefit of something like Limitless?
Oh, wow. I think it's time, space, and contrast. And more, back in the 80s and when I started, that time, space, and contrast for Australian young people wasn't as great. Just technology, the way the world is, digital nomads, a lot of these young people, COVID, they've only enhanced what we do, because what it's done is it makes their everyday even further away from this thing that we do, and that's contrast. That's a really important part.
So I should have described that a little bit more.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it that you do with our kids for those 6 weeks? What is the program?
Program is 6 weeks, and it's focused on building the young people socially, emotionally, and physically, and it's sequenced. And the really important part of the program is that it's community, and that's what we facilitate. The first thing that we want to do is create a safe environment, and so we do that through different techniques of facilitation, and then the young people will participate in a lot of actual outdoor education activities, which are all great. And they are sequenced, and then they build, because what we want to do is we want to empower. So young people come not being able to ride a bike, never being rock climbing before. And at the end of it, so we want to build their knowledge, skill, and experience in each activity. So when they finish with a 10-day expedition, pretty well run it themselves. Our staff go along. They think it's a bit of a holiday. They're there really just to keep them safe, and they love it because the kids will cook them meals and all the rest of it. So it's really about taking each young person, and our goal is to I have this thing, my goal is to help young people discover the undiscovered moment. So life's just moments, and it's the undiscovered moment that's the most exciting one. So we create a safe environment, put the young people in there with responsible group leaders and trained group leaders, and we journey with them through these activities. And it's not a list of activities that are ticked off. It's really a process. So the young people are cleaning the toilets, they're doing their own washing, they're helping prepare food.
Which they would never do at home.
No.
They would never do that at home. Now, I suppose, here in Hong Kong, it's we people live in small apartments. They're not used to the Australian outback. I mean, unless the Australian outback is something that you purposely go to. Our kids would never really have that experience. We also controversially deprive them of devices.
Oh yes,
and we also, and this is the thing that parents find quite difficult to cope with, is we spoke with some parents the other night, didn't we? That that there's no contact between the kid and parents for 6 weeks as well. And again, that experience is difficult.
Yep.
But rewarding.
Yeah. And look, every time you've heard them, the young people, and this week we did the reunion, and their biggest fear is not having the phone. They leave it here in Hong Kong. They don't even take it to the airport anymore. And that's a big deal. And then also equally for the parents. And so, but when you hear them with their testimonies at the end, they say, after day 2 or 3, and they're talking to the young people that potentially will come, you'll get over that, you'll move on. And then I think also with the parents, they write, they handwrite 4 letters, lick a stamp, and well, actually, they don't lick a stamp anymore because we need to get them back quickly. But they handwrite those letters. That's the only communication. And it's really important that we don't allow communication to come in from home. It's not just we're trying to be tough, but we set a process going and we're building these kids socially, and emotionally. And often, a couple of things happen. Some kids don't get letters from home because we tried it back 16 years ago when we started. Some young people don't get any communication from home, and then some communication from home is really some parents meeting their own needs and make the kids feel guilty. And it just takes kids back to zero almost, and the kids aren't looking for it. Or maybe at the first day, but and some kids parents will say to us, I think we've heard a few times where they say, well, they didn't write much, okay, well, they didn't have much to say on that particular day. You know?
It's something we think about a lot, and we've spoken about this with other guests on this podcast. Is the difference between long-term plans and structured plans and everything else, and just living in the moment.
Yeah,
and how much of obviously you'll need to make sure there's structure and everything else to what you do when you've got these kids for 6 weeks, but a lot of it is just forcing moments of reflection and time just for the kids to stop and think and push the busyness to one side and consider where they are and what's going on. Tell me about that, because that is not the life that our kids or kids around the world lead anymore. There's no space for pausing and reflection. There's always a distraction. So that's something that, again, I think is really unusual when people are shocked when we tell them about it.
And I think there's 2 things, and I'd put a second thing on there now. It used to be just pausing and reflecting. And now, and these, some people might say these are the same, but I use language, particularly when I do briefings with the young people, just to bring it out, because people can use it as they try to be critical with it, is that our goal is for you to get bored. And I'll come back to that. But it is 100% that. It's still school, it's still learning, but it's a different campus and a different style. And our job is there to facilitate a journey of discovery. And I'll always say to the kids, it's not boot camp. We're not going to tell you what to do, when to do it, and how many of them to do. I mean, there's a schedule. That's just logistics when you've got lots of kids.
Exactly.
And the group leaders, and to every 15 kids, there's 2 of our trained facilitators. Their job is just to guide that journey. The most important thing they have to do is, at the start of the program, is use different techniques to make that group feel safe, physically, socially, and emotionally. And they come up with ways, they come up with group operating contracts, how that group's going to operate. And so first, if we can do that, because none of us will take a risk unless we feel safe. And the level of risk that we take, that we step out of our comfort zone, to use that language, is totally proportionate to how my level of safety in that arena. So, some kids might step out and they might offer an idea problem solving. that's easy for them. There'll be other young people that's just too risky. And the cross-cultural piece I find really important, you know, like we have a lot of Asian young people, and then, of course, from ESF, there's lots of other cultures. So it's not to assume for me as a Western white man that this way of learning that because every culture is different, you know, and what people offer in community is culturally laced, you know, and so we have to also look at that, because that's about them being safe. You know, Western culture, if I'm working with Australian kids, it's who am I, who are you, who are we? That's the process model. When we're working with Asian young people, it's who are we, who are you, who am I? Just to reflect that cultural difference of going, I don't come before my community, and then also to make it easy to lead into that. And that does happen like time and time again. So they're the really important things, you know, and the activities facilitate that. So even washing their clothes, you know, I'll tell a quick story where we ran this once, and I was staying in the house on site, and I come down, there's these two young men standing there, as I was coming out, and they were looking at the instructions on the washing machine, never washed a thing in their life, dumped their washing in. And or as I was walking back, and I said, morning boys. I went out, had breakfast, had a few chats with staff. It was about 25 minutes later I came back, and the boys were still standing there in front of the washing machine. And I said, boys, what are you doing? They says, 2 more minutes for the washing to finish. I said, you don't have to stand here. I said, you can go and come back, you know, look at the time and come back. And they go, thank you, sir. And then they walked off. So it's that for me is this amazing, that's more impactful, I believe, for some of these young people than, you know, rock climbing. You know, it's those moments.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier, and look, we'll draw this to a close in a moment, because I do want to talk about that second interesting thing that you said to me. But, you know, just the mental health of these young kids. And, you know, we run our program Limitless in year 9, which I think, you know, was very deliberate on our part, because that's the point in which, you know, they're moving through this sort of transitional period between childhood to adolescence and onwards towards adulthood. And we think it's a really important part. But, you know, the impact that we can have on kids' mental health by teaching them these different types of skills. Do you see that? Do you see the difference that it can make? And you know, I suppose what's your message on this? You know, is it? It's not an easy fix. We can't just sort of change the world because the world is as it is. But you know, we're all in education looking for ways in which we can positively impact the mental health of our young kids, and this seems to be something that has merits.
And I think it's. There's a couple of ways I talk about it. You know, I think there's self-esteem and there's self-concept. Self-esteem's how you feel about yourself. Self-concept's how you think about yourself. And I want to help young people remember or discover that they are the thinker, that they are in control of that. We are who we are because of 4 things: circumstances, genetics, environment, and free will. They've shaped us. Of those 4 things, free will, we only had control over one of them. I didn't choose my genetics, my circumstances, or the environment. So that shaped the way young people think about themselves. So if I can help a young person understand that today I think this of what I can or can't do about myself, or I have fear of these things or not. If I can help them with and not primary therapy, but just in a contextual, appropriate context, and that they can actually override that thinking and make some and understand. So stop thinking about the fear or the thing, and give their mind something else to think about, and to move forward in that, as opposed to coming back to, again, I think it's that privileged position where it used to be said a lot, you know, we have the right to feel good, but we don't. Life just sucks sometimes, you know, and it's hard work. And so to tell young people, you should feel good. And we live in the most prosperous, I don't know if I read somewhere, the 60 most prosperous years of the history of the world. We live in it right now. Yeah.
Right now. And
so these kids are, you know, and good on them. You know, I'm glad I'm living now and not in the caveman times, you know, like I feel very blessed. But I think that's the thing, is to help young people to come to that place to be able to say, okay, I can control that. So fear of heights. No, I always say there's no such thing as a fear of heights. And then you know, and I had this one kid, Conch, and when I was first in the field, I'll never forget it. And he's going, we did all these are all at-risk young people. He was the big bully of the group. He gets up, he's last, and he'd waited, and he'd say, and I had said to him, okay, short term, he goes, oh, no, I don't want to go. I got a fear of heights. And I said, no, you don't. There's no such thing as a fear of heights. And he goes, looks at me, and he's like, oh, I got a fear of height. He called me a few adjectives to describe what he thought of me. He used a few. And I said, no, you don't. There's no such thing as fear of heights. And the condition was that you don't go down to the bottom. You don't get down to the bottom. So the options were you either abseil, 40-metre abseil, or we walk 2 hours around. I didn't want to walk 2 hours back around. So I was not necessarily being the most professional at that time. And I was saying, come on, mate, you can do this. And he goes, no, I'm scared of heights. And the other condition we had is if you chose not to do something, you had to articulate why you were choosing. So anyway, we went through it with Conch, and it came down to the thing where he said, okay, I don't want to get hurt. I said, oh, okay, great. So you don't want to hit the ground. You don't want to go splat. You don't want to see your femur sticking out of your thigh and blood. No, he said, that way I don't want to see that. Okay. Yeah. That's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, well, exactly.
You know? Exactly. So anyway, but long story short is I said, so we can risk manage that. We can't risk manage a socially acceptable myth of I'm scared of heights. So you don't want to hit the ground and go splat. Okay, great. Rope, breaking strain 3.5 ton, harness 3.5 ton. I've been doing this for longer than you know, blah, 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 blah. And 15 kids have gone before you. Has that outcome happened anywhere? No. Okay, good, let's go. No, I don't want to do it. And then anyway, and I said, well, why? We've gotten rid of that myth. And he goes, well, those other kids slipped and fell over halfway down. I said, oh. I said, so right now you're more concerned about actually slipping and looking silly because you're the man.
Right.
And he goes, yeah. I said, cool, let's pack up and we'll walk 2.5 hours back. That was it. And we got in late for dinner, and all the kids had made us dinner. Very bad dinner too, but they'd still made it. But, you know, and that for me, for that young person, was about saying, let's not keep making excuses of why we can't do something, or why we, you know, this or that. Let's just understand why, and then say, are we willing to step out of our comfort zone?
Surface the actual reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Look, we're drawing to a close. I said at the start of our conversation that you said a couple of things that have stuck in my mind. The second one was just your overall philosophy to life, and I think it's come through in everything you say, but what you said to me was that you follow a compass, not a map. And I think for those of us in education, that's a really interesting concept. So tell me a bit about that map.
Yeah, that came from me in really, again, looking back and as I looked at my life, and then obviously working with young people, and compasses and maps were a lot of what we did, and it became a metaphor. But if we come back to that calling piece, that is your bearing. That's your bearing on your compass. And that's that thing that it's always going somewhere. Some people might say finding your true north. Yep. You know, it's that thing that exists, and we all have it, whatever it is, you know, but we're led to believe, and that for me, in my experience, has been the most fulfilling and rewarding way that I could have lived my life. As I said, I've never planned to be anywhere. Yet we are somewhat conditioned to think we must have a map.
Yes.
And we must plot our waypoints on the map. I get a good education, I get a good job, and then I have a happy life, and then I get a mortgage or whatever else it might be. And it's just not true, you know, and I think there's enough research and everything out there now, and enough people saying that it's just not true, because, you know, and even purpose is a really heavy word. And I say calling and bearing more, because purpose makes you, oh, I've got to change the world. No, you don't. Yeah. You know, you just do when things align, and be passionate and follow that. And sometimes you'll have to glance at a map and say, okay, well, there's a track going that way and a track going that way. I'm going to go left, you know, and then you go, and sometimes you come through the forest and there's a big ravine, and you just got to go, okay, what am I going to do to get through that? Because I need to be on the other side. You know, if comfort and fear was in control right now, I'd go back. But my calling and my purpose and my bearing is saying it's pointing on the other side of that ravine. So I got to work that out. I got to go and get an education. I got to go and do whatever it might be that's going to get me across that ravine and to that place.
And how do we help our kids understand that? Because their life is structured for them by somebody else in a lot of circumstances. How do we instill in them? Because this is the big thing. This is the big idea. How do we make sure our kids understand that it's okay to walk towards the future with a compass in their hand, but not always be staring at a map?
I think we just start saying that. It's okay not to have a plan. We can say that to kids, and I say it to kids all the time, and when they leave our program, they come back to Hong Kong and I'll say to them, what are you most excited about? And it's usually fast food of some description. Sorry, parents, it's never the parents, never seeing family. I said, what are you most fearful about? Academic pressure, having to achieve, back into that system. Because they've had this freedom and space and 3 weeks, but part of our exit with them will we help them to action plan and plan what that is. So I think it's just starting to, and I think this is happening a bit in education, but we're also in this place where there's an education system in place. ESF's a massive organisation, and there's an educational model that's been going for a very long time for lots of reasons. And then there's universities that work in a certain way, even though some of the way they recruit or take people in now is changing what they're looking for. I think there's little micro shifts in the big organisations, but I think as practitioners, I always think what I'm saying to kids is not what do you want to do with your life, but who do you want to become? And not who do you want to become in your life, but who will you become in the next 60 seconds? Who will you become in the next 60 minutes, in that moment? And then you follow that bearing in that. And then most kids are going to be a doctor, or the world's best brain surgeon. They're going to be there, they're going to get there and everything in between.
Rod, it's been fascinating. I'm really grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.